HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Mind is Flat, The Remarkable Shallowness of the Improvising Brain, by Nick Chater. Read by Nick Chater.
Prologue. Literary Depth, Mental Shallows. When we claim to be just using our powers of inner observation, we are always actually engaging in a sort of impromptu theorizing. And we are remarkably gullible theorizers, precisely because there's so little to observe and so much to pontificate about without fear of contradiction. Daniel Dennett. At the climax of Anna Karenina, the heroine throws herself under a train as it moves out of a station on the edge of Moscow. But did she want to die? Various interpretations of this crucial moment in Tolstoy's great masterpiece are possible. Had the ennui of Russian aristocratic life and the fear of losing her lover Vronsky become so intolerable that death seemed the only escape? Or was her final act mere capriciousness, a theatrical gesture of despair not seriously imagined even moments before the opportunity arose? We ask such questions, but can they possibly have answers? If Tolstoy says that Anna has dark hair, then Anna has dark hair. But if Tolstoy doesn't tell us why Anna jumped to her death, then Anna's motives are surely a void. We can attempt to fill this void with our own interpretations, and we can debate their plausibility. But there is no hidden truth about what Anna really wanted, because, of course, Anna is a fictional character. Suppose instead that Anna were a historical figure, and Tolstoy's masterpiece a journalistic reconstruction of real events. Now the question of Anna's motivation becomes a matter of history rather than literary interpretation. Yet our method of inquiry remains the same. The very same text would now be viewed as providing, perhaps unreliable, clues about the mental state of a real person, not a fictional character. Lawyers, journalists and historians, rather than critics and literary scholars, might put forward and debate competing interpretations. Now imagine that we ask Anna herself. Suppose that Tolstoy's novel was indeed an account of real events, but the great steam engine slammed on its brakes just in time. Anna, apparently mortally injured, is conveyed anonymously to a Moscow hospital. Against the odds, she pulls through and chooses to disappear to escape her past. We catch up with Anna convalescing in a Swiss sanatorium. As likely as not, Anna will be as unsure as anyone else about her true motivations. After all, she too has to engage in a process of interpretation. Considering her memories, rather than Tolstoy's manuscript, she attempts to piece together an account of her behaviour. Even if Anna does venture a definitive account of her actions, we may be sceptical that her own interpretation is any more compelling than the interpretation of others. To be sure, she may have data unavailable to an outsider. She may, for example, remember the despairing words, "Vronsky has left me forever," running through her mind as she approached the edge of the fateful platform. However, any such advantage may be more than outweighed by the distorting lens of self-perception. Our interpretations of our own actions seem, among other things, to assign to ourselves greater wisdom and nobility than might be evident to the dispassionate observer. Autobiography always deserves a measure of scepticism. Might we get closer to Anna's true motivations if we ask her not in hindsight, but at the time? Suppose a journalist employed by a scandal-hungry Moscow paper is following Anna's every move, scenting a story. He leaps to save Anna from falling to her death, only to brandish pen and notepad with the words, "Now, Miss Karenina, tell me a little about why you decided to launch yourself into oblivion." This strategy seems unlikely to succeed, to put it mildly, and a discreet query of, "Miss Karenina, I perceive you are about to leap to your death. Perhaps you could spare a couple of moments to answer this short questionnaire," seems equally doomed to fail. There are two opposing conclusions that one might draw from this vignette. The first possible moral is that our minds have dark and unfathomable hidden depths. From this viewpoint, we cannot expect people reliably to be able to look within themselves and compile a complete and true account of their beliefs and motives. Explanations of behaviour, whether from observers or participants, and whether before, during, or after the event, are partial and unreliable at best. From the hidden depths standpoint, then, uncovering the true motivations for human behaviour needs more than the blunderbuss of asking people directly. It requires delicacy and sophistication. We need somehow to dive deep into the inner workings of the mind, and to measure directly the hidden beliefs, desires, motives, fears, suspicions, and hopes governing our actions, forces of which we may ourselves be only dimly aware. Psychologists, psychiatrists, and neuroscientists have long debated how best to plumb the deep waters of human motivation. Word associations, the interpretation of dreams, hours of intensive psychotherapy, behavioral experiments, physiological recordings, and brain imaging have all been popular options over the last century or so. Whatever the method, the objective is clear: to discover the feelings, motives, and beliefs that lurk below the mental surface of conscious awareness, to chart, in short, our hidden depths. Yet the contents of our hidden depths seem to remain perpetually elusive. Freudian psychoanalysts can speculate about our hidden fears and desires. Psychologists and neuroscientists can attempt to draw subtle and highly indirect conclusions from actions, heart rate, skin conductance, pupil dilation, and the rate of blood flow in the brain. But no hidden beliefs, desires, hopes, or fears are ever actually observed. Perhaps our hidden depths are an inner space that is as, or more, mysterious than the depths of outer space. And to penetrate it, it will need more sophisticated instruments and methods of analysis. From this viewpoint, our failure so far to reveal the hidden depths of the human mind should drive us to even greater efforts. In this book, I will argue for precisely the opposite viewpoint, that the project of charting our hidden depths is not merely technically difficult, but fundamentally misconceived. The very idea that our minds contain hidden depths is utterly wrong. Our reflections on Anna Karenina's fateful act should point us, instead, to a radically different moral: that the interpretation of the motives of real people is no different from the interpretation of fictional characters. And fictional characters can't, of course, have an inner life, because they have no life at all. There is no more a fact about whether the fictional Anna has a subconscious fear of dogs, doubts about the stability of the Tsarist regime, or prefers Bach to Mozart, than there is a fact about whether she was born on a Tuesday. There is no hidden truth about fictional characters, nothing beneath the surface of the words on the page. But the picture would be largely the same had Tolstoy's novel been reportage, and Anna a living, breathing member of the 19th century Russian aristocracy. Then, of course, there would be a truth, whether known or not, about whether Anna was born on a Tuesday. But, I argue, there would still be no truths about the real Anna's motivations, any more than for the fictional Anna. No amount of therapy, dream analysis, word association, experiment, or brain scanning can recover a person's true motives, not because they are difficult to find, but because there is nothing to find. It is not hard to plumb our mental depths because they are so deep and so murky, but because there are no mental depths to plumb. The inner mental world and the beliefs, motives, and fears it is supposed to contain is itself a work of the imagination. We invent interpretations of ourselves and of other people in the flow of experience, just as we conjure up interpretations of fictional characters from a flow of written text. Each possibility can be challenged with endless alternatives. Perhaps Anna primarily despaired of her precipitous social fall, or the future of her son, or the meaninglessness of aristocratic life, rather than being tormented by love. There is no ground truth about the right interpretation of the fictional Anna, though some are more compelling and better evidenced in Tolstoy's text than others. But Tolstoy the journalist would have had nothing more than interpretations of a real Anna's behaviour. And the real Anna, whether at the time or looking back months later, could do no more than venture one more interpretation of her own behaviour. We never have the last word in explaining our own actions. Our interpretations of our own actions are as partial, jumbled, and open to challenge as anyone else's. The flow of Tolstoy's text can give us the feeling that we are being given sketchy reports from another world. Tolstoy could have chosen to tell us about Anna's childhood, the impact of her death on her son, Seryosha, or how Vronsky, perhaps, retired from society and became a monk. These scenes would spring into being only as they were written. As he writes, Tolstoy is inventing more of the lives of Anna and her circle. He is not discovering more about them. Yet the unfolding of a life is not so different from the unfolding of a novel. We generate our beliefs, values and actions in the moment. They are not pre-calculated and written in some unimaginably vast memory store just in case they might be needed. And this implies that there's no pre-existing inner world of thought from which our thoughts issue. Thoughts, like fiction, come into existence in the instant they are invented, and not a moment before. The very idea of looking into our minds embodies the mistake. We talk as if we have a faculty of introspection to scrutinize the contents of our inner world, just as we have faculties of perception to inform us about the external world. But introspection is a process not of perception, but of invention. The real-time generation of interpretations and explanations to make sense of our words and actions. The inner world is a mirage. Now in fiction, while some characters are two-dimensional, others seem to have real depth. They can, indeed, assume in our imagination a vividness that may equal or even exceed that of some of our living acquaintances. We may attribute to them attitudes and beliefs beyond the printed page. Yet such apparent depth is, of course, in the eye of the beholder. There are no facts about Anna Karenina's life save what Tolstoy gives us. No hidden motives lurking between the lines. As for fictional characters, so for real people. The sense that behaviour is merely the surface of a vast sea, immeasurably deep and teeming with inner motives, beliefs and desires whose power we can barely sense, is a conjuring trick played by our own minds. The truth is not that the depths are empty, or even shallow, but that the surface is all there is. As we have already seen, it is awfully tempting, especially for psychologists, to suspect that while our everyday common-sense explanations of ourselves and each other, as guided by beliefs, desires, hopes and fears, may be wrong in detail, they are right in spirit. Anna's leap to her death is, one might think, guided by some beliefs, desires, hopes and fears, even though she may not be able to tell us quite which beliefs, desires, hopes and fears. Her introspection is imperfect or perhaps untrustworthy. But the problem with our everyday view of our minds is far deeper. No one, at any point in human history, has ever been guided by inner beliefs and desires, any more than a human being has been possessed by evil spirits or watched over by a guardian angel. Beliefs, motives, and other imagined inhabitants of our inner world are entirely a figment of our imaginations. The stories we tell to justify and explain our own and others' behaviour aren't just wrong in detail, they are a thorough-going fabrication from start to finish. Our flow of conscious thought, including our explanations of our own and each other's behaviour, are creations in the moment, not reports of or even speculations about a chain of inner mental events. Our mind is continually interpreting, justifying, and making sense of our own behaviour, just as we make sense of the behaviour of people around us or characters in fiction. If you cross-examine me or any other reader about Anna's motivation, Q. Did she think that jumping under the train would mean certain death? A. Yes. Q. Did she believe that Seryozha would be better off without her? A. Possibly, though almost certainly quite wrongly, and so on. I will generate answers as quick as a flash. So we clearly have the ability to fabricate justifications at will. But these justifications cannot, of course, be conjectures about Anna's mental life, because Anna, being a fictional character, has no mental life. If Anna were real and had survived, we could cross-examine her in her Swiss sanatorium with the very same questions, and she too could reply quick as a flash. And, for that matter, were you to cross-examine me about some prosaic aspect of my own life, for example, why I took the train rather than driving to London, I can come back with a string of explanations about carbon emissions, traffic congestion, parking, etc. The sheer inventiveness of our own minds implies that the real Anna could be interpreting and justifying her thoughts and behaviour in retrospect, using exactly the same imaginative powers that we're using when considering her as a fictional character, extended by the imaginative work of Tolstoy himself in creating her story. And this suggests that this very same inventiveness could underlie the stream of justifications we provide to explain our everyday lives to ourselves and to each other. In this book, I want to convince you that the mind is flat, that the very idea of mental depth is an illusion. The mind is, instead, a consummate improviser, inventing actions and beliefs and desires to explain those actions with wonderful fluidity. But these momentary inventions are flimsy, fragmented, and self-contradictory. They are like a film set, seeming solid when viewed through the camera, but constructed from cardboard. An improvising mind, unmoored from stable beliefs and desires, might seem to be a recipe for mental chaos. I shall argue that the opposite is true. The very task of our improvising mind is to make our thoughts and behaviour as coherent as possible, to stay in character as well as we are able. To do so, our brains must strive continually to think and act in the current moment in a way that aligns as well as possible with our prior thoughts and actions. We are like judges deciding each new legal case by referring to and reinterpreting an ever-growing body of previous cases. So the secret of our minds lies not in supposed hidden depths, but in our remarkable ability to creatively improvise our present on the theme of our past. The argument, and this book, has two parts. In the first, I attempt to clear away what I take to be fundamental and widespread misunderstandings of how our minds work. I then turn to present a positive account of the brain as a ceaseless improviser. More concretely, in Part 1, we will explore the psychological evidence that talk of beliefs, desires, hopes and fears is pure fiction. Yet it is such convincing fiction, and so effortlessly and fluently invented by our own brains, that we take it for reality. We'll find that almost everything we think we know about our minds is false. This is not the story from the psychology textbook. According to that story, common sense is roughly on the right track, but just needs to be modified, adjusted, and filled out. But these modifications and adjustments never seem to work. The common sense mind and the mind we discover through experiment just don't seem to fit together. The common sense story needs to be abandoned, not patched up. Yet while the textbooks don't take a radical line, a growing number of philosophers, psychologists and neuroscientists do. In Part 1, I will point to the root cause of the problem with the common sense view of the mind, that mental depth is an illusion. We imagine that mirroring the outer world of people, objects, stars and noises, there is an inner world of rich sensory experiences, the subjective experience of people, objects, stars and noises, not to mention our emotions, preferences, motives, hopes, fears, memories and beliefs. The possibilities for exploration in this inner world seem vast. Just paying close attention to what we see and hear, and the states of our bodies seems to reveal that our inner perceptual world is wonderfully rich, and that we just need to step off from direct sensory experience into the realm of the imagination that dreams, meditation and hypnosis seem to provide. Or we can explore the vast archives of our memories, perhaps reliving fragments of our childhood or student life. Or we can discourse with ourselves endlessly about our beliefs and values. There are many who suspect that the scale of the inner world is far greater still, that we should add into the mix subliminal perception which slips into our minds without our noticing, that we have unconscious beliefs, motives, desires, and perhaps even unconscious inner agents, for Freud the id, ego and superego, for Jung the collective unconscious. And perhaps there is a self, or many selves, or a soul. Many believe that with the right meditative practice, psychotherapy, or even hallucinogenic drug, the doors to the rich inner world of the unconscious might be prized open. And, turning to neuroscience, it's natural to imagine that the contents of our inner world might one day be accessible to brain scanners, which might read off our beliefs, motives and feelings, whether conscious or not. But all of this depth, richness and endless scope for exploration is utterly fake. There is no inner world. Our flow of momentary conscious experience is not the sparkling surface of a vast sea of thought. It is all there is. And, as we shall see, each momentary experience turns out to be startlingly sketchy. At any moment we can recognize just one face, or read just one word, or identify just one object. And when, like our imagined Anna rehabilitating in the Alps, we begin to describe our feelings or explain our actions, we are only creating stories one step at a time, not exploring a pre-existing inner world of thoughts and feelings. The more outre inner worlds of dreams or mystical or drug-induced states are similarly nothing more than streams of invention, acts of the imagination, not voyages of inner discovery. And the interpretation of dreams, far from boring deep into our psyche, is no more than one creative act set atop another. The aim of Part 1 is to help reinterpret our intuitions about the nature of our own minds, and to undercut misconceptions that have been repeated and even amplified in many areas of philosophy, psychology, psychoanalysis, artificial intelligence, and neuroscience. But if the intuitive picture of a rich and deep inner sea, of which our conscious thought is merely the glittering surface, is so utterly wrong, the obvious question is, what possible alternative story about human thought and behaviour could there be? In Part 2 we take up this question. If the mind is flat, then our mental lives must exist purely at the mental surface. Our brain is an improviser, and it bases its current improvisations on previous improvisations. It creates new momentary thoughts and experiences by drawing not on a hidden inner world of knowledge, beliefs and motives, but on memory traces of previous momentary thoughts and experiences. The analogy with fiction is helpful here too. Tolstoy invents Anna's words and actions as he writes the novel, but he strives to make Anna's words and actions as coherent as possible. She should stay in character, or her character should develop as the novel unfolds. And when we interpret the behaviour of other people, and of ourselves, the same aim applies. A good interpretation is one that does not just make sense of the present moment, but links it with our past actions, words, and indeed interpretations. Our brain is an engine that creates momentary conscious interpretations, not by drawing on hidden inner depths, but by linking the present with the past, just as writing a novel involves linking its sentences together coherently, rather than creating an entire world. Conscious experience is, therefore, the sequence of outputs of a cycle of thought, locking onto and imposing meaning on aspects of the sensory world. That is, we consciously experience the meaningful interpretations of the world that our brain creates, seeing words, objects and faces, and hearing voices, tunes or sirens. But we are never conscious either of the inputs to each mental step, or each step's internal workings. So we can report nothing to explain why we see an outcrop of rock as a pack of dogs, a fleeting facial expression as condescending or kindly, or why a line of poetry conjures up a vision of mortality or reminds us of childhood. Each cycle of thought delivers a consciously experienced interpretation, but no explanation of where that interpretation comes from. Throughout this book, my argument will be illustrated through examples from visual perception. Perceptual examples are vivid and concrete, and perception is the area of psychology and neuroscience that is by far the best understood. It makes sense to focus our attention where the evidence is clearest and most easily explained. But I have another reason for focusing on perception, namely that the whole of thought, whether chess playing, abstract mathematical reasoning, or artistic and literary creation, is really no more than an extension of perception. We'll see how the cycle of thought works, and point to some key pieces of evidence in support of this story. On closer analysis, the stories we tell about our stable personalities, beliefs and motives can't possibly be right. By contrast, The quirks, variability and capriciousness of human nature make sense when we realize that our brain is an incomparable improviser, an engine for spontaneously finding meaning and choosing actions that make the best sense in the moment. Thus, our thoughts and actions are based on a rich tradition of past thoughts and actions, which our brain harnesses and reworks to address the challenges of the moment. Moreover, just as today's thoughts follow yesterday's precedents, so they also set precedents for tomorrow, giving our actions, words, and our life a coherent shape. So what makes each of us special is, to a large extent, the uniqueness of our individual history of prior thoughts and experiences. In other words, each of us is a unique tradition, continually in the process of creation. As the story unfolds, we'll see that we are, in a very real sense, characters of our own creation, rather than playthings of unconscious currents within us. And while each new perception, movement, and thought builds on our unique mental tradition of past perceptions, movements, and thoughts, we are also able to build new thoughts from old in a wonderfully free and creative way. Our current thoughts can become locked into patterns of past thoughts, but they need not be. Our human intelligence gives us a wonderful ability to create new thoughts from old, and such freedom and creativity does not depend on the rare seeds of genius or the occasional spark of inspiration. It is fundamental to the basic operation of the brain, how we perceive, dream, talk. Our freedom has its limits, of course. Amateur saxophonists can't freely choose to play like Charlie Parker. New learners of English can't spontaneously emulate Sylvia Plath, and physics students can't spontaneously reason like Albert Einstein. New actions, skills, and thoughts require building a rich and deep mental tradition, and there's no shortcut to the thousands of hours needed to lay down the traces on which expertise is based. And for each of us, our tradition is unique. With those thousands of hours, each of us will lay down different traces of thoughts and actions, from which our new thoughts and actions are created. So each of us will play, write, and think in our own way, though sometimes with remarkable flexibility. Musicians and poets can impersonate each other, and generations of physics students can and do learn to reason in Newton's shadow. Yet the same points arise in our everyday lives, our fears and worries, our sometimes bumpy interactions with other people. Our freedom consists not in the ability to magically transform ourselves in a single jump, but to reshape our thoughts and behaviours one step at a time. Our current thoughts and actions are continually, if slowly, reprogramming our minds. The ideas in this book are drawn from a wide range of sources, ranging from cognitive, social and clinical psychology to philosophy and neuroscience. Perhaps the most fundamental inspiration for me has come from attempts to understand the brain as a biological computing machine. Scientists have been considering how vast networks of biological neurons are able to serve as powerful computational machines since the Second World War. Such connectionist or brain-style models of computation work very differently from the familiar digital computers that have revolutionized all our lives. Although connectionist computation, in the form of so-called deep neural networks, is currently sweeping all before it in the project of building intelligent learning machines. Connectionist models work through a process of cooperation between vast numbers of neurons, filling in and rearranging fragments of information, rather like simultaneously jiggling the pieces of a jigsaw into place. But it is very hard to reconcile this vision of the machinery of our brain with our everyday intuitions that our minds are guided by beliefs and desires. Our common-sense psychology attempts to explain our behaviour by summoning beliefs, motives, hopes and fears sequenced into a reasoned argument. So an everyday explanation of why I headed down to the shop on a fruitless attempt to buy a newspaper might involve beliefs that the shop is open, that it sells my favourite paper, that I have money with me, and desires to read this particular paper, a preference for the print rather than the online edition. And this explanation makes sense because it can be arranged into a credible justification of my actions. The type of justification I might provide to explain why my actions, although unsuccessful, were entirely reasonable. Rather like mathematical proofs, arguments are formulated step by step. I'd like a copy of the Western Bugle. I could read it online, but spend my life looking at a screen.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?